So I think we're up to the time to get going here. Sorry. There's 3 chapters here, but they're short. The next chapter is so long, I cut it in half into 2 pieces. So here we're talking about client-side exploitation. The low-hanging fruit is these really weak attacks. If you have vulnerable services listening on network ports, things like buffer overflows or command injection, default passwords, nonsense like PHP myadmin consoles with weak passwords and stuff like that. Those are just let you walk right in. So if you want to prevent those things, you patch things, change your default passwords, run your network services without making them administrative privileges and so on. But there are other software on the machine that you could attack. One popular thing you attack is Microsoft Office, Adobe PDF Reader, Java, music players. All those things are in principle vulnerable, but they're not usually connected to the network. So you can't attack them directly over the network. What you have to do is send somebody a file and trick them into running it with social engineering. So you email them a media file that they try to play with the media player, and then you get in. Now, if you run a bind shell in your malicious files, you probably won't get anywhere because it's probably behind a firewall. And if you open a listening port, you can't get any packets to it from the outside. Reverse connections are more likely to work if you have Windows firewalls. So we'll talk about this stuff. Bypassing filters with various Metasploit playmodes, and then some client-side attacks, some in the browser and some out of the browser. So if you have port filters, now the default Windows firewall filters only incoming traffic and it lets everything go out. That is not what Microsoft wanted. Microsoft promised, starting with Windows Vista, that they'd have a firewall that could block outgoing traffic, because there's a bunch of outgoing traffic that is obviously malicious. Like if you get infected with an email bomber, your machine will now start sending out thousands of email messages. So they can clearly see that that's not normal behavior, and they could block it. And they wanted to block it, but when they made the firewall block, obviously, malicious outgoing traffic, they got complaints from major corporations like HP saying, we have proprietary custom software we have written that communicates between machines at our corporation on unexpected ports, and we will not tolerate any outbound filtering by default. It is too much bother for us to have to push out a group policy to turn off the firewall or something. So Microsoft complied, because Microsoft has always been sort of like BlackBerry. They're about the money. They say, whatever you want, we'll do it. We're perfectly happy to compromise our security if you'll pay us more money. That's okay. So anyway, so that's the game. Your firewall might block outgoing traffic because it might have a different firewall than the Windows firewall. And then, but almost nobody blocks outgoing traffic to destinations of 80 or 443, of course, or nobody could surf the web. So you could use reverse HTTP or HTTPS to do that. And there's even an all-ports payload, which will do what modern BitTorrent clients and Skype do. It will do a port scan, trying every port to find something that will go out. So it will use whatever it has to. It will, of course, take a long time, so the target will freeze for a while. So it would be wise to migrate to another process, but because it takes several minutes to try all the ports. Anyway, like I say, you have HTTP and HTTPS payloads, which will more easily escape and more easily slip past data loss prevention systems, especially HTTPS, which is going to encrypt it. So if your client allows direct encrypted traffic to a remote HTTPS server, then you can exfiltrate anything and it will never catch you. That's why what the college does. The college lets you connect to, say, Google over HTTPS without man in the middling it, and that is a low security posture. That is not something a major corporation would let you do. They would force you to accept a man-in-the-middle attack. We would give you a fake key for Google so they can open it up and examine it and then re-encrypt it and send it on to Google. And you'd be getting warning messages in your browser unless you had an official company machine that had an extra CA installed to match the company CA, or unless they are like law enforcement or the major companies that bribe somebody into giving them a stolen root CA, or delivered semi-illegally as a result of a bribe, whatever you want to call that. That's common practice. And it's not probably exactly illegal, but it certainly violates the fundamental security model of the internet. But it is now an open secret that all the big CAs will sell you a root CA certificate for this purpose if you want it, and you pay them enough money. All right, and the bad guys do it too by just stealing them. The Komodo hacker hacked 2 CAs and dumped out their stuff and destroyed them, and claimed that he had 4 more where he'd stolen everything and he's not telling you he can still use them for this purpose. And you can't prove that happened, but there certainly is no reason to doubt it. Komodo hacker proved that that he or she was in fact successful at getting into some CAs, so there's no particular reason to doubt that they got into some other CAs. All right, then there's proxy servers. Some people have proxies on their systems so that you can't make any direct connections to the internet at all, not even over HTTP. Instead, all you do is you connect to the proxy, and then the proxy goes and fetches the page for you. And the point of that is they can put an access control list in the proxy that says you are all allowed to go to Google, but you're not allowed to go to games, you're not allowed to go to porn sites or something. And if you try to go there, it won't fetch them for you, and you can't bypass it because you're not talking directly to the internet anyway. And Meterpreter, or Metasploit, does have payloads that will connect back through the proxy, using the proxy in the middle as they should. Just like your browser knows it has to go through a proxy, there's no reason why your Meterpreter commands can't be going through the proxy as well, as long as your software is proxy aware. And they don't mention it here, but I should mention Meterpreter also has, Metasploit also has IPv6 payloads that will send the traffic out through IPv6 in any of these forms as well for the more advanced companies that are using that. So they pay attention. You know, any cool thing, especially hackers, love to jump on whatever the new thing is that nobody's using because it probably isn't going to be examined by the IDS. The network administrators probably aren't looking for it, and that's why when about 2-3 years ago, all kinds of people were running BitTorrent over IPv6 because the network monitoring systems couldn't see it, so you could get away with murder. So the hacking tools usually jump on the new things faster than the legitimate people. Anyway, so here's some client-side attacks. You're going to attack any kind of software on the machine, really. Music players, document viewers. You create some kind of malicious file that exploits a vulnerability in any one of those things, trick them into opening it, and then you can do whatever that program can do. All right. And this is increasingly important because with bug bounties and the fast patch cycle, Microsoft Windows used the operating system back in 2000 or so. The Windows operating system itself was the main vulnerability. It was just all full of holes. Microsoft was humiliated and they improved their product, so by maybe 2008, only like 5% of attacks were coming through the operating system anymore because Microsoft fixed everything. What they were coming through was the browser plugins like Flash and Java, and now people are patching those, so what's left is the other applications on the machine. And it'll be a while before we get all of them. And it might be something like a game or anything else. Like I say, this is probably the new broad category of low-hanging fruit, is all the incidental applications people have that you can get them to run something. So another issue, besides a proxy and filtering, is you might be behind NAT. Almost everybody's behind NAT. So your machine actually has a private IP address locally. Now this means, again, that a bind shell will be completely useless. If you listen on a private address like 192.168 on some port, no traffic can reach you except from on campus. Anybody off campus can only go to the public address, and the gateway will not send any of that traffic to you unless the server administrator has configured port forwarding on the gateway. So unless it's an authorized service like your real web server, it's never going to work. So this is why you make reverse shells from inside NAT. And the whole point is, you do that all the time. You're inside NAT, you make a request going out, and the address translation is designed to make that work. It will translate it to a public address and a public port, make the connection, and automatically forward it back to the right machine. So it's pretty easy to overcome by just using a reverse shell, but in fact, it does mean that your packets are passing through more layers of translation. All right, and you can exploit the browser, of course. There's lots of these. One of the famous ones would, of course, to jailbreak me. This would exploit mobile Safari on iOS, way back in, I think, iOS 4 or 5. You could just take over the machine with a PDF page that was loaded from here. Didn't last long before Apple patched it. But this is what everybody wants. There's an offer on the table right now that people will pay you $1 million for a mobile Safari attack that takes over the latest version of the iPhone. There are no public exploits that do it. Jailbreak Me was almost a decade ago. It's been a long time since we've had this kind of vulnerability on the iPhone because Apple is really serious about iPhone security and they keep patching stuff. And if somebody did find one of these, they wouldn't just release it to the world for free. They'd sell it basically to the NSA or some other group who will pay $1 million for it. So, all right. The Aurora Attack is responsible for bringing into public visibility the actions of nation-state actors. Google wanted to expand their company into China, which was a huge moral dilemma at the company. In the late 2000s, between 2000 and 2010, American companies first had the boom of the internet, then it crashed, then they wanted to grow again. And they said, you can't, China has 1 billion internet users, or 2 billion or something, and that's where you're really going to make money, is by expanding into China. And I remember they talked about the internal discussions at Google, and the question is, are you going to stay out of China and become a second or third rate company, or do you want to be the world leader? Because the world leader will be in China, because they outnumber everybody else. So if you let some scruples prevent you from expanding into China, you are sacrificing the world leadership position. And Google decided not to do that, on perhaps the business grounds that they wanted to pile of money, or perhaps on the moral grounds that they wanted to have some influence over China, which I must say, I think people are fooling themselves when they think they're going to shove China around. I don't know, Google thought they could shove China around and change their policies, and I don't know what world they're in. It does not look to me like the Chinese government moves 1 inch in response to pressure from anybody. But anyway, so they expanded in China, and China forced them to hire locals, and the locals were spies and stole all the data. And then they hacked into Google to steal more data from them, and they felt really abused, which is what almost everybody expanded into China reports. The only company that succeeded in making money in China was Yahoo, because they partnered with China, and they ended up partly owning the clone Alibaba. And then when they left, they still own Alibaba, and they're making money. All the other American companies that went there just sort of got robbed and thrown out. Because what they do is they infiltrate your company, they steal your stuff, they make a Chinese imitation of whatever you're doing, and then they kick you out. And you don't actually make any money. And that's what happened to Google. So they were very, very abused when they got hacked here, so they went public, which was new. China had been doing this to everybody for about 6 years, but everybody was quiet about it, and there were rumors in the security community. But Google publicly said, China hacked us to steal our stuff, we hate their guts, here's what they did, and kicked open the can. So that was the Aurora attack that created the awareness of the advanced persistent threat in the nation-state actors in this space, which now we know there's a bunch of them. So there's a Metasploit module that does the Aurora attack that China used on Google. One of the many embarrassments for Google here was that it was an Internet Explorer attack, and Google had to admit that they weren't using Chrome. There's people using IE, that's why they got owned, and a whole lot of things happened here. After that, they passed a rule that everybody has to use Chrome. You know, this tends to happen. So, normal IE attack, if you want to attack a browser, typically, what you do is run a malicious web page. You've done it here. So you choose one of these attacks like MS-14, OLE, co-execution, and then when you do the exploit, it will start a malicious web server serving a page on this, this IP address with some name. And then the victim has to browse to that page. So there must be a component of social engineering where you have to somehow trick them into going to that page. Although, to be fair, it could be quite subtle. You could, for example, do something like DNS poisoning on their local network to modify, to put yourself in the middle, and then use beef to inject payloads, extra script into their page so that they don't even have to click on a link. You add script to their page that goes here. But somehow you have to trick their browser into making a request to that page, which almost always involves some social engineering. They open that page, then they will get warnings in modern browsers, and more warnings as browsers get more and more paranoid about this stuff. And if they click past those warnings, then you'll have this, then they run the malware, then you're in. And of course, if you had better, nastier malware, it wouldn't trigger so many warnings because it wouldn't be obviously malicious. So, however, if you do, once you've got them to run something, you now have an interpreter running on that machine, but it's injected into a process, typically by DIL injection. So the place it lives normally is in the browser. It might also spawn its own process, which looks like what this one did. It spawned some process with a random name. But anyway, it's got a process you can do, get PID on the machine. This one's running in 3924, so there's the process. And if that process gets terminated, you lose your session. Now, this is why there was a saying at CCDC about 3 or 4 years ago, the cyber defense competition, that if you look in Task Manager and you're running Notepad, you're owned. Because the default for many Metasploit payloads is to spawn a new process of Notepad and put the malware in there. So that was a common thing people do. Now, that's better than running it in the browser, because the browser is probably freezing in order to close it and restart their browser. If it spawns some Notepad with no window that you can see, they probably won't notice it unless they go to Task Manager. Of course, what would be even better would be to migrate over to something that's naturally there. So you've got migrate. Migrate is a script, so you run it with run migrate. You can then launch a process and migrate into the new process, and if you don't tell it what to do, it will launch Notepad, but it will not open a visible Notepad window. Or you can kill the original process afterwards if you like, but you can then migrate into another process, a process either by name or by process ID. And usually what you want to do is migrate to Explorer.exe. So here's the host module. These scripts are actually deprecated. We'll talk more about them later. These scripts still exist in Metasploit, but they've been deprecated and they're supposed to be moving into post-exploitation modules, which do the same thing with a slightly different series of commands. So here's the migrate post-exploitation module that will migrate to another session and let you move things around as you like. Now, you might want to migrate as soon as you connect. Automatically, it would seem to me like this probably is the way every Metasploit module ought to do. As soon as you're in, immediately migrate to Explorer.exe unless otherwise instructed. Don't just stay in the browser. But anyway, they don't have it automatically, but you can do it with set auto run script. To migrate -n Explorer.exe, and then as soon as it connects, it'll immediately migrate. This is what real malware does. Real malware has stages that go off, and if you do the malware analysis class, you can watch them go in your monitoring tool. First it connects, then it goes to FTP, then it draws some more, then it moves over, then it makes a registry key, then it downloads some more. Just does it all automatically. All right, so Explorer.exe is typically the best place to live because that process, it draws the start button, it draws all the windows, it starts as soon as you log in, and it continues until you log out. So this is pretty good. This is pretty good persistence. There is nothing the user can do short of logging out or shutting down that will stop this process. Although, if you want to, you can go to Task Manager and kill Explorer and then restart a new Explorer. And that is something we used to do pretty often in Windows 2000 and Windows XP to fix glitches on the desktop. And I've noticed Windows has a lot of those again. So, but that's a fairly common tech support activity, but most people would accomplish the same thing by logging out and logging in, which is a lot easier to understand. Anyway, and there's PDF exploits. These things were all the rage until maybe 3 or 4 years ago when Adobe finally got humiliated in actually improving their product. And now there's less of these out there. Up till like 4 years ago, Adobe was just a kick me sign. There was a new thing every month. I remember one of the Swift on security tweets was, until further notice, all Adobe vulnerabilities are 0 days without it being any special notice on them because they were just so common. But it's not that bad anymore. Anyway, there's a bunch of these. Adobe PDF actually has the ability to add an exe inside the PDF, which runs, which is, this is why they're a kick me sign. They have features like this. The same thing's true of Java. Java just has a feature to run this executable, please. So that's why it's not even a bug. It's just a feature. So that's why it was just ridiculous for a very long time. So here's the file format embedded exe. They finally, turned this off by default. Microsoft Word used to have this. It used to have an auto script you could run as soon as you open a document that could do anything. Reformat the hard drive, send out email. A bunch of people make the same mistake. They just put in some extension module that can do anything. And they say, boy, this is great. I can have new smileys and all sorts of good features. And they don't think until later about all the bad things you could do with it. I found a vulnerable form here on City College that requires you to use an old version of PDF Reader. I don't know if they've updated that yet. This actually is quite common, that people use some form of PDF that requires you to use an old reader. There was a client about 4 years ago at a bank where the bank required you to use an old version of Adobe PDF to use the bank, and then they got hacked, and they stole 200 grand from the company, and the bank refused to pay. They said it's your fault, and they won in court. That's kind of harsh, but that's the way it was. Anyway, so if you open this thing, it'll tell you, it'll warn you there's encrypted content here. See, the modern PDF reader will warn you if this thing contains scripts or malicious things or anything that looks funny and ask you about opening it. And that's part of the security they have. So it's getting better, but it still tends to be pretty terrible. So I'm going to start Kahoot. First, let me start Zooms for the remote viewers. Comes Zoom. While that's happening, I'll go to Kahoot. All right. Make this a little bit smaller. There we are. Start without video. Share. Share. Unmute. Mute them from each other. Not that important, but maybe. All right. So glorious Kahoot. Kahoots include Kahoots for this class. There we go. I think it's coming. It is. A 5-digit number. Either Kahoot has become more popular or more secure. Here comes some people. One people. Alright, guess I'll wait another 10 seconds and see how many I got. Alright, still coming in. Alright. Alright, I think that's it. 4 questions. Alright, how do you exploit a local process that doesn't even listen on the network? Alright. With an email attachment is how you do it. A reverse shell is not going to answer the question. That would happen. That's what you do after you're in, but a reverse shell is not going to get you in. You're going to have to use an email attachment to get in. So what shell will encrypt traffic? HTTPS, of course. Good. All right. So who performed the Aurora attack? All right. That was China. I thought it was very funny that the articles were saying Kaspersky is bad, uninstall Kaspersky and replace it with Chinese antivirus. And I'm like, dude, I'm not sure that's making it any better. Anyway, all right. So what process should you migrate to? All right. Explorer, that's good. All right, I'll get the top 3, which is Serial Killer, and Anna, and EC. I know Anna. The other 2 will have to remind me who they are. Is EC here? Oh, good. Or I'll get your name. Good. All right. So let's just carry on then. So here. Okay, so Java. Java was ridiculous. I used to use it as an introductory project in a beginning class for years because Java also just has a feature of running any executable you tell it to run, so you can just take over machines. And the cool thing about Java exploits is they run on every operating system. That's why people use it. Android, Linux, Mac, PC, it's all the same code. So if you do make an exploit, it'll run on any machine. So you trick the user into opening a malicious URL, and then they started putting warnings. For a while, you get a warning saying that this thing was not signed, and as they improved security of Java, it gave you more and more vigorous warnings and defined security categories, and it got harder and harder to run the malware until I finally just quit using that project, because nowadays, it's pretty hard to believe that anybody's going to be dumb enough to approve all these warnings, and that's the point. It's really a lot better than it used to be. And again, like PDF, they just don't have as many modern, serious vulnerabilities in it. They were both of them just ridiculously insecure, and after starting about 4 years ago, they both sort of started shaping up. Also, an enormous number of people quit using Java on the client side. It was very common for Windows machines to expect you to have Java and Flash installed, and then Apple came out with the iPhone and the iPad that just refused to have either of them, saying these are terrible technologies and we're not going to pollute our operating system with it. And because they had the majority of the mobile web use, every website had to quit using it, or the people using the iPad and the iPhone couldn't see their website. So the power of Apple greatly suppressed the use of Java on the client side. It's still very popular on servers in the form of Tomcat, for example. huge server clusters handing out web applications, but they do not have Java on the client very much anymore. All right, there's also a browser auto-own module that will just run every attack and try to get you many shells. When this was a new feature in Metasploit about 5 years ago. Some people thought it was great, other people thought it was cheating and you shouldn't use it. But when I tried it a year ago, it didn't seem to work anymore. It just runs everything that's supposedly for that browser against it. But when I actually, so here it's trying to exploit something, trying to run 20 exploit modules, now sending all 20 exploits at the server. And what I found is it doesn't work because it's trying Java that's not there, doesn't work on Firefox, doesn't work on Chrome, even Windows 7. In my experience, this browser auto-own doesn't seem to work anymore. Like Beef. I wasn't able to get much good out of Beef either. Remember, I think we went through that in an earlier class. Beef, when it was brand new, it did a bunch of cool stuff, and they pretty much patched it. And now about the only thing that seems to still be valuable in Beef is it can pop up fake update messages pretty well. So it's really just the social engineering that persists. All the other attacks, people patch them, of course. All right, yeah, so here's what happens when I ran IE7. It will then pop up and tell me my Java is out of date. That's reasonable. That's a fake update. And here it's going to tell me it's blocked. And here it's going to give me another warning. It actually crashes IE instead of taking it over. So, these old attacks don't work that well. All right, and here's failing again. So I wasn't too impressed. Then we got a chapter in social engineering, which I think you know quite a bit about. The main tool advertised in this chapter is the Social Engineer Toolkit. I also used that for years, and this semester I abandoned it again because it's far too buggy. Well, every time they update Kali, they update set, and a whole bunch of it quits working. Every time I've tried to use Social Engineering Toolkit, about half the options work and the other half are broken. And they just don't seem to keep it updated enough to make it useful in my experience. Now, it does have some features that might be worth it if you're really seriously doing spearfishing. Like, it has the ability to send an email to like 1,000 people with exploits in all of them and stuff. And so that, you might be willing to put up with its bugs to do that. But to attack one client, I find it to be just as easy to use Metasploit and MSF Venom alone than use the Social Engineer Toolkit, which is a shell that sits on top of Metasploit and just uses it the same way Armitage is, puts a graphical environment on top of Metasploit. Armitage seems to stay working better than set. Every time I write instructions, the students are all complaining because the next version of Kali breaks everything and they don't work anymore. And I got fed up with it. But anyway, it has a bunch of these here, and I think a lot of these are out of date too, like Adobe Cool Type, that's several years ago. Here's a word exploit. But anyway, you can make all these things and put them in email attachments and send them off to people, and of course, you'll get a lot of shells when they do it. You can have email templates. You can clone web pages and make a fake Google page and a fake corporate page and everything. So those things are pretty useful. But of course, Gmail now blocks it with their antivirus scan, all those things. Anything created by Metasploit is now blocked by every antivirus product because, of course, they are not idiots. They watch Metasploit and they make sure they can block all that. So you can't really send it through public email services anymore because they all scan for obvious malware. So, it's less useful than it used to be. The web attacks are what I used to use in the previous class. Like the Java attack was awesome until about 3-4 years ago when Java finally updated their stuff. That would just take over everything. And there's a lot of other ones that are all right, but most of them have been patched. They're not as effective as they used to be. It has like a browser auto-own and has a tab napping attack that will say, please wait, and then hope that you will, while you're bored, go look at Facebook, and then it'll steal your Facebook password, that sort of thing. And it has Credential Harvester that makes fake login pages. But when I tried to use Credential Harvester, it didn't work anymore, which is what I find for a lot of these activities. All these Metasploit derivatives seem to work when the original author makes them, and within a year, a bunch of it quits working. Seems to be with all my projects too. Unless you're constantly fixing it, after a year or two, it's out of date and doesn't work anymore. And these things are written by like one hacker that has something better to do, and so they just, Dave Kennedy wrote Social Engineering Toolkit, and now he's a TV celebrity. So I really don't think he has full time to devote to maintaining his product. Anyway, so that's the game. Credential Harvester didn't work because it hasn't updated to the latest Apache change, so it puts the stuff in the wrong directory to be seen by the web server. It'd be pretty easy to fix, but it just means you can't click through the menu and have it work anymore. And of course, that's why everything breaks. If it's not that somebody patches it, some of the software it depends on changes stuff, because everybody in tech has ADD. They all move everything around every 6 months, even if it was okay, until they drive you all mad. And for real fun, I was mentioning in the last class, you should see all the new defenses they're putting in Windows 10. Microsoft is really getting fed up with this nonsense, and they are putting in really good stuff in Windows 10. And they're putting in folders that have an extra firewall on the folder, so only certain applications can go in there. So you can have a folder full of Word documents, and you can say only Microsoft Word can go in here, so when you get infected with ransomware, it can't encrypt the stuff. That's pretty clever. And they have what they say is an outgoing network filter that uses artificial intelligence to notice all these reverse shells and block them. And that sounds like science fiction, so I don't know how well that's going to work, but they're on the right track. They say we're going to detect. They also say this one will work. They say they're going to, well, they already know the location of all the command and control centers and malicious software because they get reports for their browser. And if you use Internet Explorer or Edge, people say it spies on you because every URL it goes to, it sends it up to Microsoft, and they compare it to a list of all the known bad sites. And if it's a bad site, they won't let you go there, which is the same thing OpenDNS does. Because both Microsoft and OpenDNS have such a large sample that they really can detect most of the command and control centers and malware download centers. So they've now expanded that to non-Internet Explorer products. So if you download Metasploit and Meterpreter and run it, and it tries to call a known command and control center, Microsoft will block it in the latest version of Windows 10. They'll block all connections by any program to a known bad site. And that would really help. You know, that's pretty good stuff. So then there's antivirus. Antivirus has been annoying us all for years. And as pen testers, it's always in your way. You write this great stuff, and then antivirus blocks it, and then you feel abused. So typically you make Trojans. We do it with MSF, Venom, and the Social Engineer Toolkit will use Metasploit to do essentially the same thing. So you take your payload, like a Windows Meterpreter reverse shell, to this command and control center, and then you connect here, and then it looks like you execute. Yeah, you make it executable, and you put it in a file called Evil Notepad++. So this one here actually adds the malware to an existing executable. So you made a malicious version of Notepad++ now, so you can somehow tell people, here's the latest updated Notepad++, which new features, like giving me control of your machine. So that's cool, but if you run it up, a lot of antivirus products will catch it. 24 out of 55 at Virus Total, which is really bad. That really means essentially every reasonable antivirus is going to catch it, and you're not going to be able to take over anybody unless they're running no antivirus at all. So there are antivirus evasion methods built in Metasploit. They have about 10 of them. The one they are very proud of is Shikata Ganai, that scrambles the bits in some way that they think is awesome. The people that wrote this are martial artists, and this means something to martial artists, not to me. But anyway, in fact, of course, the antivirus people have Metasploit too, and so they watch like crazy for anything with Shikata Ganai on it, and they block it without even knowing what's in there. So this actually makes you more detectable to use the Metasploit obscuring stuff. Cross-compiling works like crazy. I did this for a couple of years, sneaking things past antivirus. If you write it in another language and cross-compile it over to the first language, this is a technique from the Violent Python book. You write malware in C, then you load it in Python as a data object in RAM, and then you run it, even though it was supposed to be data. This baffles antivirus, and you can totally slip anything through. The problem is it's not very practical for real antivirus people because the files you create are like 1 megabyte big, and that's way big for viruses. Malware tries to be small, but for a while I made things that would go past various antivirus engines, and this cross-compiling trick will sneak stuff through every antivirus engine, even Last Line, even FireEye, just everything. It goes right past it because it's unusual, and it's not being used by real bad guys. So I mean, after I published it and gave talks about it and everything, some of the antivirus companies contacted me and said, okay, we see this stuff, but we're not going to bother blocking it. You know, because they could detect it, but nobody's really doing it this way, so who cares? But it just shows that antivirus is not as brilliant as you might think it is. It's really not that different than just sort of a human sensor, like your parents saying, I like this kid, don't let that kid in my yard, they look bad. It's just blocking whatever they've decided to block. Now this sounded pretty brilliant to me, Hyperion. It encrypts the file with AES, but Secretly, the AES key is not random. It's drawn from a predictable list. Like in my cryptography class, there's some of the homeworks where you have AES and they give you most of the keys. There's only like 24 bits missing, so you have to brute force the remaining 24 bits. So you can get in, but only because I didn't choose a truly random key. And this does that deliberately. Instead of storing the key somewhere, it's encrypted with an unknown key, but it brute forces the key because it doesn't really have to try all the bits. So that's pretty smart. And when you run it, it will brute force the key, decrypt it, and run. But apparently, the antivirus engines are onto this. Apparently, they caught onto it, and they found some way to detect when Hyperion's on there, probably without decrypting anything, probably by some characteristic code in the decryptor. But anyway, that sounded pretty brilliant to me, and I bet you could write some obfuscation engines based on this principle that would really work for a while. Of course, everything's only going to work for a while until the antivirus companies get some samples and figure it out, and you'll have to keep mutating. Veil Evasion is one of the ones I didn't do me much good. There's a variety of these things you download. They're semi-underground. They all tell you, please don't upload this stuff to VirusTotal. But people like Kaspersky automatically upload stuff. So you really can't use it very much before it goes on somebody's machine and has that automatic upload, and then the AV people have it, and then it quits working. So Veil Evasion had a pretty good reputation, but I think their secrets have leaked out. I think if you wanted to really do this, you would have to have a steady team of developers constantly mutating your product. And I don't think there's enough money to be made in selling antivirus evasion products, although maybe there is. Certainly not legally, but anyway, it's interesting to do a sort of research project. There was a DEF CON contest one time where they had some malware and they wanted to see how many people right there could mutate it to get past the antivirus. And they didn't report the results or anything, but from when I tried doing it myself, it is extremely easy. Just the very first thing you try will totally work. Antivirus engines are really stupid. And but it will only work until people really start using it to hurt people, and then they'll detect it. So, you know, it's not really a practical way to make money. All right, so I got another one of these things. All right. And I guess I left the share going. Well, that's all right then. So I'm hoping these 7-digit numbers mean that Kahoot is more popular and therefore more prosperous. But I don't understand how they survive. There's no money going to them for anything here, unless I'm missing something. Perhaps they're mining bitcoins on my machine while I do this, or sticking my machine malware on my machine. I don't know how they're paying for anything. I suspect they're burning through some startup funds. And when they're gone, they will have to get bought by somebody like Google who will put ads on the page, or they will just vanish. Anyway, I kept local copies of my Kahoots. Because I could write my own engine that would do this, but it wouldn't be half as much fun because I wouldn't have any of the funny music or stuff. If you've done my binary games, you see what happens if I make this kind of thing. It's really the game with all the fun removed. Sort of like what Google would produce for a social network, like Google+. Let's have a social network with all the fun removed. And then wonder why no one is there. So it takes a different kind of mind to throw a party, and the analytical database mind is not the right one. Anyway. All right, 4 questions. Okay, which exploits are multi-platform? All right, that's Java exploits. By the way, the first multi-platform virus was about 4 years ago. It spread around, and it used the Java exploit that Dave Kennedy, I think it was, wrote and put in Social Engineering Toolkit. And so he said, hey, people are analyzing it and finding it. They're not giving me credit. I wrote that. I'm not sure I'd be so proud of that. But anyway, it was an accomplishment of sorts. And that is certainly, by the way, all the legitimate tools like TeamViewer and the Metasploit tools and everything are used by real malware. The credential harvester, Kerberos credential harvester, Mimikatz, Windows credential editor, they're all repurposed and used by real malware. And that is why some people think we shouldn't teach classes like this, we shouldn't distribute stuff like Kali, we should just shut up about all that, because some of that is in fact used by bad guys for bad purposes. It is an issue. Anyway, so what's the difference between fishing and spearfishing? It's recon. The difference is you actually gather data about the target and customize the attack to be appropriate, excite the people you're talking to. You don't just send out some generic message like your PayPal account is going to shut down or something. All right, which one uses an AES brute force attack to evade AV? That's kind of brilliant. All right, that's Hyperion that does that. All right, and what's the Metasploit tool to evade antivirus? All right, and that's Shikata-Ganai. There are about 10 others. Metasploit will even let you use 4 rounds of this and 3 rounds of that and 6 rounds of that to encode it, but none of it will work. Anyway, all right. So Tom H, I know who that is. Groot, I do not know who that is, but he gets a lightning bolt by his name. And Kaji, I think I do know who Kaji is. All right, so I need to know. I need to know who Serial Killer is. Oh, good, okay. And how about Groot? Groot's in the room. How about, I think that's it. I think that I can identify everybody. Okay, and here comes something over the internet. Oh, Blake. Oh, right, I'm with you. Okay, fine, okay. Good. Thank you for reminding me. All right. All right, well, I'm going to stop this and go up to the lab and help people that want to work here.